Okay, here's your lecture for the physiology of female athletes, the differences between men and women that I think are important for you to know and to understand why we do split the genders when we look at sport, why we don't expect them to compete against one another, because we are physiologically different. Biologically, we're different. Physiologically, there are so many differences in our bodies that it makes more sense to have the comparisons between gender amongst genders versus against genders. So we're going to be looking at the women's physiology and its relationship to exercise, the influences and effects of exercise and training, and then the roadblocks for females in that training. Sport biomechanics, which this involves, is the intersection of sport, biology, mechanics, and a relatively vigorous physical activity level, human anatomy and physiology, and matter and motion. This is what biomechanics entails all of. We study the masculine or the androcentric and the feminine or the genocentric aspects of biomechanics to look at the differences between males and females. Biomechanics is the science that examines the internal and external forces acting on a human body and the effects produced by these forces. So when we talk about biomechanics, we're talking a lot about the science behind these forces that interact with the body and how the body responds to them. When we want to talk about and look at the biological factors of the female body, we want to first talk about physiology and performance and talk about pre-puberty and puberty in females and males. Puberty for girls hits at an earlier time. It onsets around 12 years of age. For males, it's about 15 to 16 years old. So women have about a 3-year jump on the development in puberty than males do. And pre-puberty, it's really important to know and to understand that there's no sex-related differences between boys and girls. When girls hit puberty, their estrogen levels start to increase. For boys, it's testosterone. And when women have that estrogen increase, that's when their bodies start to change and develop differently from males, because males with testosterone builds muscle mass. That's what testosterone does in the male body. That's what their androgen does. And then what happens with females, the effects of estrogen on the body is completely different. You get fat in the breasts, you get fat in the buttocks, the hip area, your thighs, and also there's a lot of things that happen to your reproductive system, your ovaries, your vagina, and then of course your brain, your heart, and your liver. All of these different areas of the body get impacted by estrogen and help the female body form and prepare to be able to give birth, right? This is where we have the benefit of having estrogen, is that it allows us the ability, or should help us and allow us to have the ability to conceive and to carry a child and to prepare another human to come into this world. So right away, once we hit puberty, again, for girls about the age of 12 and for boys between the ages of 15 and 16, we see the changes starting to happen between men and women, in that women have estrogen, men produce testosterone, and those do completely different things to our bodies. But in comparison, even from the get-go, the untrained body, the untrained young males versus young females, we see differences in general between the untrained body and the trained body. So when we look at just the bodies, male and female, in young males, overall, they are 10% larger than young females. Muscle mass, young boys are 2 times stronger. They tend to be 2 to 4 times better in strength tests than girls. And overall, they're about 2 times stronger than females are. Men have 15% body fat and females have 25% body fat. That's a 10% difference in body fat. And those things alone, right? More body fat percentage for women and less muscle mass in general for women are going to make women and men different from the onset. Just their untrained bodies are that different. So obviously the gap is bigger where women have a lot further to go in order to get stronger and lose that fat than men do. So there's a huge difference. And then once you hit puberty, men have testosterone that help build muscle mass faster than women who have estrogen that creates more body fat and deals with the other things that come with having the estrogen production. So there's clear differences in the bodies, even at an untrained body, compared to compared to when you start training the body. Although training can start to close that muscle gap, that natural gap that occurs, we know from the very get-go the bodies are different in that regard. Men's bodies are bigger, a little bit more muscle mass, stronger, and leaner. And then with estrogen and what women's bodies go through as well, we also deal with a menstrual cycle. And for even you men in the class, it's important for you to understand the menstrual cycle for women because it's a very important part of a female body's general processes, general normal functioning, and it's an important part of the body's functioning. There's a few different definitions that I think are important to know. I didn't really put them on the slideshow, but I want to put them out there for you. Menarche is the onset of puberty. That is when a woman starts her period. It triggers puberty. Or the development through puberty, and the onset of menarche can be delayed through intense training. So we want to be careful when we get youth girls involved in sport that we don't overtrain them, overwork them, under-rest and undernourish them too early in life, because if they have a delayed onset of menarche, then that is going to set off a whole host of issues for them as they develop into life. So we don't want to overtrain a young girl's body so much that we delay the onset of menarche, the start of their period. The menstruation cycle in general that a female deals with every 21 to 32 days changes a female's body. So when a woman is going through their menstrual cycle, their body is very different. Their temperature rises, and they carry more sort of a fuller feeling. They're bloated, and they're more emotional. Their chemical mental imbalances are clear, and they're more sort of mentally raw and full of emotion, and so they feel things a lot stronger, whether that's anger or frustration, sadness, even euphoria. These things are much more heightened in their time of menstruation than when not. But the things that come with training is the higher temperature increase, and the less laxicity in their joints. These are all things that happen during menstruation that can be a concern to a female when she's training or competing in a sport. Menopause is the end of your period, is when, so you maybe your mom or your grandmother, you've heard them talk about menopause, and again, their body is completely different in terms of how it's regulating itself. The temperature fluctuates drastically. They may have like major sweats and then chills, and this is all their body reacting and trying to manage itself and regulate itself without having its menstrual cycle. Many times women are dealing with these issues of the regulation before they actually hit menopause, which is menopause again is when they no longer have their period. But But it is important to know that this is something that women deal with when their bodies stop having their menstrual cycle. Their bodies start to function again differently because they're not going through that process of having their menstrual cycle. Amenorrhea, I talked about in the previous lecture. Amenorrhea is when you go 90 days without having your period, and that is a huge concern because it means that your body is not regulating normally, and then that means that your body's going through some sort of stress, and there's something going on with your body's ability to regulate and have its regular menstrual cycle. So when we're talking about amenorrhea in a female that's training really hard, we might want to look at how hard she really is training and if she's overtraining, because overtraining can lead to the loss of your period, and we need our period to help our bodies continue to function and properly process and properly operate. And then the other part that I think is important for us to know about with females is osteoporosis. This is decreased bone density, a mineral density in our bones, which is irreversible. So if you hit osteoporosis, it's a bad state because your bones have completely depleted, they've lost mineral, they're less dense, so they're more apt to breaking and cracking, stress fractures, all those things. And obviously, if we hit that point in young people, young female athletes are physically active, it means that their bodies are not strong enough to manage through those kinds of issues. So women, like I said, women have that additional concern around their estrogen production and then their menstrual cycle, that is important to understand because it does make their training a little bit different, and especially when they're dealing with their period, because we want to make sure we're not overly stressing their bodies. And so that is an important factor to understand about the difference in female and male bodies. Again, I want to just make sure that I remind you that the women's average body fat content is 25%. Again, this is untrained, and the males average about 15%. So that 10% difference is really big when you're talking about men automatically being about 2 times stronger in muscle mass and then also being 10% leaner. The comparisons become much closer when males and females are specifically trained for their sport specific activity. We can see a decrease in body fat on women, just as we can see the decreased body fat in men. But again, women have a bigger gap to overcome when we're talking about trying to get from 25% down to, say, 10% body fat than males have to achieve, right? So they have about a 5% decrease they have to achieve, where females have about a 15% decrease. And so that's a big difference that we want to make sure that we recognize. And then going back to the muscle mass, I'm sorry, I'm kind of jumping back to this, but I kind of forgot these things. But jumping back to muscle mass, again, compared to men and women, the upper body strength for women tends to be about 25% less than males overall. And the lower body tends to be anywhere from 60 to 70, even upwards to 75% of what men can achieve. And then also we see differences in the fast twitch and the slow twitch muscles. The fast twitch muscles are muscles that we tend to see more in endurance athletes, and the fast twitch muscles are we see more in the power sport athletes, the quick spurts of energy and power, and the slow twitch are those in endurance athletes. And we do see that these muscle fibers, these slow and fast twitch muscles, the distribution of them tend to be the same in males and females. The distribution is the same, but the overall strength is different. Like I said, in men is more apparent than in females, and the untrained body. So we want to make sure that we're aware of those major differences in the untrained body, and that females, again, have a longer way to go to sort of close that gap between the untrained male body and the trained, between the untrained male body and female body, to get to a place where their bodies are trained to compete in sport. Aerobic capacity too is important to know. The aerobic capacity is the ability of the respiratory and cardiovascular system to deliver oxygen to muscles and for the muscles to use the oxygen. Men have proportionately larger hearts and lungs, so they're able to pump more blood to the muscles and therein have higher concentrations of hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is the protein in red cells that's the carrier of the oxygen from the lungs to the working muscles. And men's hemoglobin concentration is 10% higher than females. So we, again, not only are we looking at leaner bodies, stronger bodies, but we're also talking about more efficient bodies in terms of men having the ability to pump blood a little bit faster, have a higher hemoglobin percentage that gets the oxygen to the muscles to be able to use. So those are significant differences as well. And when we're talking about aerobic capacity, we're talking about trying to achieve a maximum oxygen consumption, which is another word for your VO2 max, VO with a subscript 2 max. We want to achieve a good VO2 max to increase, which means we have an increased aerobic capacity, and we see higher VO2 max counts in endurance athletes, right? So long distance runners, skiers, swimmers, those that have to be able to endure longer lengths of time and use maximum oxygen capacity have higher VO2 max counts that we see. And so so what we see, so what we see again is the men's, because their hearts they're stronger and larger, their lungs are larger capacity, they have the better, faster and more efficient ability to get that oxygen to the muscles for their muscles to use. Women have naturally about a 15 to 20% handicap when it comes to VO2 max aerobic capacity. So again, they have a bigger gap to make up for, and typically coaching and training can diminish that gap down to about 8 to 10%. So it can alleviate anywhere from 10 to 12% of that handicap that women naturally have from the beginning. So they can close that gap a little bit, but again, men, they tend to have on the onset, they have a 15 to 20% lesser capacity for aerobic capacity, lesser ability for aerobic capacity than men from the onset. Okay, so I think those are sort of the main things I want to talk about. I'm just kind of checking my notes